When I met Aaron, he was pretty much had his mind made up to move to Jamaica. And I had been teaching at Hunter. It was probably a job I would never have left under most circumstances, because to land a university teaching position straight out of graduate school is practically unheard of. But they had a budget cut at Hunter, and I had to take a semester off. I was the low man on the totem pole, so I was told to cool my heels for a couple of months. And I met Aaron through Mati, and that's sort of another side story. My tools had been stolen at my studio in Union Square, and I had to close the studio because the tools were very specialized and they were expensive and they had taken a long time to put together. So to continue to pay rent on the studio when I didn't have the tools to work made no sense. So I just decided to close the studio, and I called Mati and I said, can I store this big piece of sculpture? I was working in plexiglass at the time, and this was the outline of a room in plexiglass, and was reproduced in Harper's Bazaar, and it had a lot of play. Timothy Leary did an acid trip in it even, and said it was peopled by all kinds of wonderful things, which I didn't see in there. But anyway, I had to move this piece over to Mati's studio. So he came over to my studio and I brought Aaron with him to help him move it. And Aaron had just fresh out of the Israeli army, not too long out of the army, you know, buff and handsome and Israeli. And I'm sitting there totally depressed, and Mati walks in the door with Aaron, and I'm, oh, things are looking up. So anyway, we pretty much bonded almost immediately, and then somehow we lost track of each other for about a year, but we met a year later, and that's when he was getting ready to go to Jamaica, and I had my semester off. So he, you know, we really kind of fell in love immediately, and he said, do you want to go to Jamaica? And it's January in New York, and I'm not teaching. I said, sure. So I think I'm taking a few months break, and I'm going to go to the tropics and come right back. And we never left. Still there. 2 Jamaican children born there. It's been magical, dramatic, stressful, extremely challenging, and totally rewarding. All of those sort of in sequence. When we went there, first I couldn't believe just the sheer beauty and spirituality of the place. My first encounter, sitting on a lawn waiting for Aaron to come back and pick me up. An old Rasta man walks by, and he looks over the fence where I'm waiting, and he looks me up and down, you know, big dreads, and he says, good morning, star child. And I'm thinking, where am I? Is this heaven? You know? And everything was so beautiful. Aaron had rented this beautiful house on the water, on a private cove, a sweet little cottage, which happened to be where Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller had their honeymoon, and Peter Finch had lived there. It was not fancy, but it was sweet. So we lived there for a couple of years. The first child was born, Benjamin was born. And people kept coming from New York, you know, old friends at first. They started coming from New York because we had this cool place. So anyway, it was very serendipitous, and then it got very political. Michael Manley ran for office. We at first believed in him, and we campaigned for him, and then it got totally chaotic and tumultuous and turned into the state of emergency, which was bloody and brutal and pretty unbelievable even when I think about it now. It's hard to imagine that that went on in Jamaica, because it was so contradictory to the culture and the fiber of the country. So then the kids were born, and they grew up in a bit, when they were young, they grew up in a bit of that melee, you know, in that time of danger and uncertainty. Certainly violence was everywhere. I mean, you could hear machine gun fire at night. You're trying to get to sleep. You don't know where it is. Anyway, eventually that did come to an end. Kids grew up, they did well. Aaron had a lot of struggles because there are still, because he went there trying to implement modern urban planning practices, and there were entrenched interests who just really didn't want to see progress in the country. The people stayed poor and ignorant. It suited them just fine. So he had to struggle against all of these forces. And it has taken all these years to get beyond that point. In the meantime, he did some wonderful work. for inner cities, but in inner city neighborhoods. But aside from that, he also did things which were tremendously successful, such as the land use plan for the Cayman Islands, which he did 40 years ago and has made them prosperous. So it's had its challenges, it's had its tragedies, and it's had its triumphs, but that's life. When I first went there, New York was still my lodestone, so I'm returning to New York, and one day I'm going up in the elevator to say hello to the people in my department at Hunter, and this very elegant art dealer gets in the elevator with me, and he looks me up and down and he says, "Oh, Tina, are you still in Jamaica painting sunsets?" And I said, "Yes." Which was true. So the whole thing, my whole vision had changed. You know, nature was so overwhelming. You know, the canyons of New York and the hard-edged steel no longer seemed appropriate. And then he dropped his eyes to my shoes and he says, "Oh, I like your shoes." And I said, "They're orthopedic." So I had my orthopedic shoes made in bright yellow. Anyway, so that kind of sent a signal to me that maybe I was no longer on the New York track. And when I went back, became totally dedicated to being part of the Jamaican art scene, to helping it evolve, to being I knew Edna Manley, who was the founder of the Jamaican art movement, and she was the wife of the former premier of Jamaica and mother of Michael Manley, the Prime Minister of Jamaica. And she had founded the National Gallery of Jamaica and the Edna Manley School for Visual and Performing Arts, which was then called the Jamaica School of Art. So I became very involved in that movement of building the Jamaican art movement and trying to help it evolve.